Hi guys, so in this video, we're going to be discussing about how you are going to writing and how you are basically going to write an evaluation for a question which says, is inflation harmful or not? And we already know that a lot of questions in past papers come for inflation, whether you are asked to, explain how serious inflation is in the economy, how harmful it is in the economy, and how serious consequences it can have in the economy. So first of all, yes, inflation is harmful, and we will write all the disadvantages of inflation, right? Which I'm not going to be covering in this video, but yes, later on we will be covering that, and you will see those videos on my channel as well. However, just remember that whenever you are writing the answer for evaluation, or whenever you are evaluating an answer, you are supposed to mention the as in whenever you are writing a disadvantage of inflation, you are supposed to mention to what extent inflation can be harmful. And whenever we are commenting on to what extent something is harmful, obviously we will be debating on the extent. And whenever we debate on the extent, we're actually critiquing our narratives, like yes, inflation can be harmful, inflation cannot be harmful. And critiquing, remember that a critique of the narrative is the core form of evaluation. That is what actually evaluation is, that you're critiquing the narrative. So if is inflation harmful or not depends upon various factors, such as you know whether, as in what's the rate of inflation. So if the rate of inflation is mild, obviously the inflation is not harmful, right? Or maybe if there is price stability, right? So yes, if there is price stability, which usually occurs during a mild inflation rate, then again that is not a harmful, that that's not such a harmful thing for us, and the government does not needs to worry. Or there is no need for the government macroeconomic intervention, where the government needs to come up with policies such as the monetary policy or the fiscal policy or the supply side policy, where you say that the government is intervening, and where the government kicks in and implements some sort of contractionary monetary policy or contractionary fiscal policy or maybe supply side policy to reduce or control inflation. So that is not required if you have price stability. Yes, the rate is stable, although yes, it's, you see that the price level is accelerating, it's increasing, but still there is still some form of price stability, because the rate of increase is stable. So all, and if you have a rate of inflation that is mild, between 2 to 3%, and that is again an indication of price stability as well. Again, inflation will not be a problem if it is anticipated, because whenever the inflation is anticipated, consumers, firms, and the economy overall, businesses, investors, they are prepared for that to happen, and they take their decisions accordingly, right? They plan according. So an unanticipated inflation will have more serious consequences than inflation that is not anticipated. Now, obviously, when you guys will be going to A levels, inshallah, so over there also you might be seeing any of my video on my YouTube channel where I have mentioned the evaluation of inflation, but that will be from an AS perspective. So an O level perspective, yes, you need to know, but obviously you need to know in a much deeper level when you are studying for the AS perspective as well. So if the inflation is anticipated, that would not be much of a problem as compared to inflation that is unanticipated. Then it also depends upon the reasons for inflation as well, right? It also depends upon the reasons for inflation as well. So guys, if for example you have cost push inflation, right? Now you have cost push inflation, and I'll just run you through quickly what cost push inflation is. Cost push inflation is an inflation that arises due to a rise in cost in the economy. So there's a rise in the cost of production of the economy, right? The overall economic cost in the economy is going up, maybe due to excessive trade union pressure, maybe due to a rise in key raw material prices, maybe due to a rise, maybe you're importing an expensive raw material, or maybe you're importing a key raw material such as oil, and your exchange rate has weakened, your currency has depreciated, but the price elasticity of demand for your imports is basically inelastic. That actually is, that makes it impossible for you to import less quantity, hence you need to import the same quantity. And if you're importing the same quantity at a much higher price, that will increase the import bill, it will increase the import expenditure. So obviously you will import at a higher cost, and this would lead to a rise in the cost of production for the firms. And definitely when the firm's cost will rise, they will panic, they'll freak out, they need to reduce output then, because firms need to maintain profitability. And in an attempt to maintain profitability, they will shift those burdens on the economy, on the consumer, through a form of rising prices, and hence that rising prices would actually have a ripple effect on other industries as well. And that we'll see that the overall economy's cost would rise and the overall economy's price level would go up, since it feeds through the economy through in the form of cost push inflation. So that's what cost push inflation is. And then you'll make a diagram for cost push inflation, which right now is not the purpose of this video, but then again, you must be knowing what it is. Moving forward, then what you will say is that once you've identified the reasons for inflation, so you know that whenever the cost of production would rise and then the firms would actually reduce their output, which means that SRAS will shift to the left. It means that short run aggregate supply would shift inwards, which would increase the price level, but at the same time, it will reduce your national income. Your real GDP is going down, your national income is going down, since real GDP and national income is the same thing. So what's happening is that your real GDP is going down, your national income is falling, and obviously this would result in unemployment. And we know that whenever unemployment and inflation go hand in hand, that's a situation of stagflation. So stagflation is a situation when your unemployment and your inflation is rising at the same time. So which makes inflation quite worse off as compared to demand for inflation. So if you compare inflation as you, on one hand you write demand pull, on the other hand you write cost push, and you see that in a demand for inflation, your real GDP is going up, while in cost push inflation, your real GDP is going down. In demand for inflation, your unemployment is falling, while in cost push inflation, your unemployment is rising. So this makes cost push inflation a much worse situation as compared to demand pull. Although yes, demand for inflation can be a problem, is a problem as well, especially if the rate is excessively high. But a mild rate of inflation, especially a mild rate of demand for inflation, is also considered a problem for the economy, right? However, cost push inflation is a more serious problem because that is resulting into simultaneous increase in unemployment accompanied with huge levels of stagflation. So if you are commenting or evaluating on how bad inflation is, then you need to tell that how bad inflation is depends upon the type of inflation which we are talking about. If you consider the demand for inflation into account, then yes, demand for inflation would not be much of a problem because it is accompanied by rising real GDP and rising employment levels as well. However, this too is debatable depending upon the rate of demand for inflation, right? However, on the other hand, cost push inflation poses serious consequences, worse circumstances, negative circumstances on the economy, right? So these are the situations that will actually determine whether the inflation is good for the economy or bad for the economy. Yes, demand for inflation is considered less negative than cost push inflation because it increases your real GDP and reduces unemployment. However, this again depends upon the rate of demand for inflation. If the rate is excessively high, that is a problem for the economy, right? Moving forward, you will also say that not all rise in aggregate demand is inflationary, right? Not all rise in aggregate demand is inflationary because you will draw the Keynesian model and you will say that the Keynesian school of thought or the Keynesian economists believe that if the economy has spare capacity, then a rise in AD will not result into a rise in inflation. So if aggregate demand is going, if AD is rising because of factors that impact AD, maybe C is rising, maybe I is rising, maybe G is rising or net export is rising. So in that circumstances, the Keynesians argued that a rise in AD would increase real GDP without a simultaneous increase in price level. So if you see, the Keynesians argued that a rise in aggregate demand is causing real GDP to go up from Y1 to Y2 without any increase in price level, without any subsequent increase in price level. And the simple reason is that there's a lot of spare capacity available. And whenever there is spare capacity available in the economy would utilize that spare capacity. And since resources are idle, so basically a rise in AD will not cause that inflation. Because you need to understand that why does demand for inflation arises? The reason why demand for inflation arises is that whenever demand AD goes up, what happens is that it results into a shortage of factors of production. And when we are drawing this diagram, we are assuming that the shortage is coming. So when there's a shortage of factors of production, the price of factors of production goes up. And when the price of factors of production goes up, that then feeds through the economy through rising demand for inflation. So so basically, here we are saying that there is no shortage of factors of production in the Keynesian model, and you're saying there's a lot of spare capacity. So the firms would actually end up utilizing that spare capacity, utilizing that slack, utilizing that idle resources, and then increasing output. So the economy will not experience demand for inflation. However, if the economy reaches close to full employment, that is at 83, then the economy will only experience an increase in price level, and that too slightly. However, once you reach full employment levels, that is at this point, let's say this is point D. At point D, the economy has reached level of full employment, level of national income, that is YFE. Any rise in AD beyond, YFE, beyond point D would result into serious levels or high rates of demand for inflation without any form of, without any subsequent increase in real GDP, because at this point, the economy has exhausted its resources. So इधर अगर आप ये कह रहे हैं, for example, if you are saying that demand for inflation is beneficial because it increases real GDP and it reduces unemployment, then you can't really say that if the economy is at point E, let's suppose if the economy is at point E, then you can't really say that at point E it's benefiting the economy, because here there is unemployment is not going to fall because you have already exhausted your resources. So this is an absurd situation for the economy because it's just experiencing an increase in price level with no rise in output. Neither the unemployment is going down because everything has been exhausted. So there's no, so theoretically, I mean, nor practically nor theoretically, your unemployment is falling. So as a result of that, you need to tell the examiner that, okay, fine, this situation applies in here, but this situation is applicable over there. Right. So at point E, even demand for inflation is not benefiting the economy. Right. So I hope you guys understood this video and enjoyed this video as well. I'll see you all around in the next video. Until then, take care.